Welcome aboard! This is a Captain's Log. Genuine, honest, and the coolest of Star Trek Trekkies is standing next to me, and that is Lili Fox-Lim!
Thank you, BK.
I'm the ambassador of the fans, Star Trek fans, of course. My name is Bryan Kreutz, and we both love Wil Wheaton.
Love, as in like a romantic relationship leading to species propagation or courting between humans type of love? Or the we love Will's personality, charm, charisma, and being the formidable foe to no one except being American crewman Rawdon on Star Trek The Next Generation as the Wesley Crusher, now a traveler, last seen on Star Trek Picard. Time to love you, man. You went the second time.
Yes.
Right, BK?
Case in point. See, Lili, you said it the best, and then there's the rest. So many Trekkies would envy getting inside your brain up there to see how Star Trek knowledge works so well for you. Yes, we love Wil Wheaton for his Paramount Plus show, The Ready Room. But you forgot one.
Kuvat! As a Star Trek fan, it's dishonorable to forget any single credit for an actor as fine as Wil Wheaton. Yes, we love The Ready Room. Oh, Bryan, welcome back. No apologies, as those are reserved for the dishonorable Patak.
Well.
French forever, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely not! Klingon type of violence. But next time, I'll require a warning and a stunt performer's credit for that vicious Captain Kirk 1960s knockout punch Lils.
Thank you, I've been practicing.
No, we're all good.
Okay, all good, because as infinitesimal as my omission may seem, the Star Trek universe must have full and complete credit on actors like Wil Wheaton and a comprehensive full list of credits and roles played in front of or behind the camera. That way, our Star Trek fans are left with an honorable, comprehensive list of Trek knowledge. Bryan, let's start talking about all of the decades upon decades of crew roles that Doug Drexler worked on Star Trek, shall we?
Absolutely, yes.
Essentially, Doug and Geoffrey have been together, trucking towards triumph since they were teenagers. And Geoffrey Mandel, by the way, is a production designer who is the scenic artist for Star Trek Insurrection, the 6th and 7th seasons of Star Trek Voyager, and the 1st season of Star Trek Enterprise.
Yes, Lili. So if we get into the category of saturating Star Trek with contributions, a name like Tom Morga might come to mind. But there are countless crew roles and contributions where Doug Drexler's name would be at the top of the list in the Star Trek franchise, right? Drexler officially became affiliated with Star Trek, as you mentioned, in the 1979 film The Motion Picture. He worked as a concept illustrator, which he still does for the newer iteration of Star Trek shows, as recently as Star Trek Picard.
Ooh, wow. So many years and so many shows together, including 5 total Star Trek films, Star Trek The Next Generation, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Star Trek Voyager, Star Trek Enterprise, and, like you said, Star Trek Picard. Doug has contributed to all of these. And also, Doug was nominated for 2 Emmy Awards during his time working diligently behind the cameras, and he, in fact, had a Paramount office on Star Trek.
Nice! I want a Paramount office. Very impressive indeed. So, Lili Lils, our Star Trek fans would recognize Doug Drexler's name on so many episodes of Star Trek as a makeup artist, scenic artist, producer, illustrator, special and visual effects staffer, background actor, author, publication artist, publication editor, technical consultant. There's so many Doug's contributions, decade after decade. Really became a Rick Berman era Star Trek staple. And he's practically done 60% of everything in Star Trek, okay? He's worked in almost every department on the television and film side of the Star Trek universe.
Oh my gosh, not to mention Doug Drexler won an Academy Award in 1991 for his makeup work in a film called Dick Tracy. Then Michael Westmore approached Doug for the makeup position on Star Trek The Next Generation, where Doug was a 2-time Academy Award nominee. Clearly, we're not the only ones who are impressed by Doug's work. And there really is so much to talk about this New York City native now living in California.
Absolutely, indeed, Lili. I can't wait for this interview. We have Lili Fox-Lim always ready to ask the tough questions, and Doug Drexler always ready to answer them. We are about to commence a 2-part interview here on A Captain's Log with the Doug Drexler.
So as Mr. Data would say, saddle up.
Yes, well, Brent Spiner is from Texas, right? So he would probably enjoy reading that line for our android of all androids here on A Captain's Log. Bring on more Trek!
Okay, here it goes. More to come as the story develops, and on the other side of this break, we have Doug Drexler joining us here on A Captain's Log. Back in a moment.
A Captain's Log returns in a moment.
First, let's introduce Joanna Ferbrache. Computer, open a channel to our USS Aura shuttlecraft Europa Valley.
Hi there, Ambassador Kreutz, and Lieutenant Commander Lili Fox-Lim.
Whoa there, Lieutenant Junior Grade Ferbrache. No need to be so Starfleet formal. You're among friends here. Nice uniform, Joanna. Tractor beam me.
Well, thank you. This story is straight out of Compton, the location of the technology company distribution site Worldwide Technology, that is. Artificial intelligence may be a 20th century possibility, as Spock would say in The Whales. Can you name the 2 episodes in The Next Generation and the single episode in Star Trek Picard where Professor James Moriarty appears? Tractor beam that one to connect Bryan and Lili.
Oh, I know the 2 Next Generation episodes, but what was the title of that Picard episode? You know, where they're in the museum and...
Okay, I got you, Beak.
Okay.
Here you go. Okay, I mastered the one and only Tractor Beam Me segment so far.
Okay.
And I'm not going to let this Lieutenant Junior Grade get all up in my face about it this time. It's the Next Generation episodes, Elementary Dear Data, Ship in a Bottle, and the Picard episode is The Bounty.
The Bounty!
The Bounty!
Oh, Lili, you never cease to amaze me.
Nor I myself.
Another Spock line like mine as a reference. Nice.
A captain's log returns in a moment.
Let's welcome Academy Award winner and jack of all trades, Doug Drexler, to our show. Welcome to A Captain's Log, Doug.
Hey, you guys. What up?
Doug, how did you get your start at a young age in the visual scenic arts and even makeup growing up in New York City? Was there anyone or anyone's work specifically that you grew up admiring in particular that you wanted to emulate or drew inspiration from to help you develop your own design style?
I really owe getting into the business to Dick Smith, who was an amazing character makeup artist that I adored his work. It was just absolutely stunning. I mean, you know, most people are familiar with The Exorcist, and Dick has done a lot more than that, but there was a makeup in that movie. If you watch the movie, you think it's the possessed little girl, but it isn't. And you find, I think after I saw The Exorcist a few years later, there was the priest in The Exorcist, Father Marin, played by Max von Sydow, who was like 86 years old. And then I saw him about 4 years after the movie, and he was in his 40s. And I'm like, what the hell? And it's like quite a ways before digital, where that was, I mean, today you could, it almost takes away from it a little bit that the computer makes some of it so easy, you know. And it turned out Dick Smith lived in Larchmont, New York, which is only like 15 miles from me. We ended up hooking up and I started working. My first picture was The Hunger. It had David Bowie and Catherine Deneuve and Susan Sarandon in it. And it was, Tony Scott was the director. And, you know, Tony Scott, Ridley Scott's brother, written by Whitley Strieber, no less. You know, who's so well known for Communion and, you know, the UFO stuff. But that's how I got started in the business. And it was because I admired this guy so much. It turned out he didn't live that far from me.
Doug, you have one of the most unique starts in the Star Trek universe. As I understand it, in 1979, you and Geoffrey Mandel flew from New York City to LA in an attempt to sneak onto the sound stages of Paramount, having no connections. Please tell us about this fascinating escapade.
Well, I mean, we had originally opened a store in Manhattan at 53rd and 3rd called the Federation Trading Post. It was a Star Trek store. 76, yeah. And that's how I met Jeff Mandel, who, you know, when they were going to do a movie, we decided we had to fly out to California and try to sneak on a backlot. But we had known each other from the Federation Trading Post, and that we had been doing a magazine called the Star Trek Giant Poster Book. And we hired some of the best experts on Star Trek for the time, which, you know, back then, there weren't that many who were, you know, well known. I mean, you could find a lot of people today, but back then it was really rare. And we had people like Jeff. Well, Jeff came into the store. He was 14 years old, and he had blueprints that he had done of like the Klingon battleship, warship, the Klingon battle cruiser, which we'd only seen on the original series. Had done blueprints of it and did blueprints of K7, and he came into the Federation Trading Post with his blueprints, and he was like 14 years old. And we were just blown away by how good he was. I mean, he taught me a lot, and I was older than him. And it's funny. I mean, when I was on Deep Space Nine, we needed someone to come in as an assistant, and I think Jeff was working towards being a writer, but that's a really tricky road. And you know, we offered him a position on Deep Space Nine, I guess it was, and he came in, and he's been important right up to Picard. He was on Picard with us. When you think about me and Jeff trying to find a way to sneak onto the back lot here, and then ultimately having so much to, you know, I had gotten an appointment. I had bullshitted my way to Howard Anderson that used to be on the lot at Paramount on Melrose. And Jeff had gotten through to Lee Cole, who's a graphic designer on Star Trek Motion Picture. And we got 2 invitations onto the back lot. We had no idea whether we were going to get in when we flew out. And so we got 2 invitations. And we went and visited Howard Anderson, and that was cool. Then we went to the art department, which remained the art department all the way through, you know, to the end of Voyager, I guess. Jeff and I went up there and we met Lee. She wrote me a recommendation on the spot. And I remember when I was on Enterprise, Herman Zimmerman brought her in to do some design work. And I brought in the note, the recommendation she wrote for me from like how many years ago? I think I think she was totally amazed by that. But I remember I also had a letter on the wall in the graphics department from Bob Justman when they were first doing TNG. And I wrote him saying, you would make this kid's dream come true if he could come out and visit the sets. And he wrote me this letter saying, we want to make this kid's dream come true, but I can't say when because it's up to you. Whenever you say, we'll just be waiting for you. And I had that on the wall in the graphics department. And one day Bob came up and I showed him the letter stuck to the wall. And I think he was a little flipped out by that. But I saved it and I actually put it on the wall. But it really meant a lot, you know.
This is truly a testament to your tenacity and eagerness to work on Star Trek. Now, Bob Justman was also so influential in Star Trek. To me, this is an amazing story and letter you have commemorating your eagerness to work on Star Trek. Can you tell us a little bit more about Bob Justman?
He was the second most important person on the show. I thought he was the heart of the show. It's such an interesting history. I remember him back on The Adventures of Superman. I think he was the first AD with George Reeves. I got to know him fairly well, along with Mike and Denise Okuda. He was like an uncle. You know, they were uncles from the original series. Matt Jeffries felt like uncle, like he was our uncle. Stephen Whitfield, Stephen Poe, was another one that felt like an uncle, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Eddie Milkus was one from the original series. He'd stop up in the art department and stick his head in, you know, and say, don't forget, this is going to be one of the moments that you consider to be the best time of your life. Although I've been really lucky and I feel like my life has been almost continuously the best time of my life.
Doug, briefly tell us what production illustrator and art director Mike Miner was like in person, and also talk about Lee Cole. Tell us about her in the visual effects and art on Star Trek.
Mike Miner was a geek, just like the rest of us. And that's why when he met us, he took Jeff and I kind of under his wing and showed us a few things on his own. I didn't know Mike super well, except for that time when we were visiting. He was a good friend of Bob Burns. You remember a book called Bob's Basement?
Yeah, actually I do.
He's in North Hollywood, and he has like one of the greatest science fiction collections of all time. You know, just like all of us, we're all aging, you know, and I think he's to a point where I don't know what's happening to his collection. I mean, he had the George Pal's time machine, had the Nostromo filming miniature, amazing
From
stuff.
from Alien, yeah.
Yeah. So Mike was good friends with Bob. And I learned more about Mike from talking to Bob. I just know that he just was one of us, He was a fan. That's why he was involved with it. I wish I had gotten to know him better. But I know that when he met us, he knew we were kind of kindred spirits. Lee Cole, she's a very sweet person. She let us get onto the back lot. She took the time to talk to us. I never had the feeling she was a geek. Like Mike Miner was a definite geek, you know. In the same way that Greg Jean is a geek, that they're really in love with the genre. It was a very special era for the genre because it wasn't mainstream popular yet. People who liked science fiction seemed to be rare, and that science fiction was mostly mocked as being lowbrow. I find now that we're in an era where it's become big money. That was one of the things that amazed me about Star Trek. Gene had people like Theodore Sturgeon, Harlan Ellison, Jerome Bixby. I think that he actually ended up regretting working with real science fiction writers. I think it turned out to be a problem for him because they were used to writing whatever they wanted and not being told what to write. And of course, when Harlan Ellison does City Edge of Forever, he's got Scotty selling drugs, stuff that Gene just can't allow. And Harlan is a bomb thrower. He loves stirring the pot, I'm sorry that we don't see more science fiction writers doing science fiction for television and movies, but I guess that is more than some people want to deal with when their hair's on fire, egos and stuff like that. No, you know what? When we snuck on the lot, we did that by ourselves. And then Bob happened once I was actually doing makeup with John Caglione when they were going to do Next Generation. And John said, well, why don't you just call Bob? And I did, and I got right through. It was nuts.
It's amazing.
It's like I've been writing my memoirs. And when you start trying to put these things in a linear timeline, you realize that some of the things you thought were wrong.
Now let's get into some of your very recognizable professional career artistry. I want to start with your accomplishments outside of Star Trek and then finish with what these experiences meant to you and how they led to Star Trek. So can you please tell us about your work on Poltergeist 3 in 1988 with creepy but cool effects for so many scenes with Carol Ann and Kane, as well as Manhunter and Dick Tracy in 1990?
I was like, oh, for God's sake, can't we get a movie that doesn't have a numeral after it? I mean, I felt like we were fortunate to get the job, and Dick Smith stood up for us to get it. But it was at a point in the Poltergeist series where it's almost like what's happening to Star Trek now, where it's become a brand, and they're just trying to keep it going. Where the first Poltergeist was kind of its own little strange organism, with all kinds of legends surrounding it, and Tobe Hooper directing when they say it was Spielberg, and but for us, a couple of guys who were doing makeup out of Brooklyn, it was, to get the job was just a thrill, I mean, the shows I really think about are Manhunter, which is Michael Mann with Bill Peterson. It was like the pilot to CSI, It's the first job where, John Caglione was really in charge, although we were partners. And it's the first time I went to location and I was doing the makeup because John would take a chance on me. Because he was kind of a new guy himself, That movie, The Hunger, was super important. I said Manhunter, FX, Starman with Dick Smith. I mean, the Hunger was really super important. It's the start of my career, you know. Nothing beats Dick Tracy as far as having an impact on my life. I mean, Warren Beatty, people don't realize now how big he was in Hollywood politically, and you know, he got us into the Union. He brought us out from New York. That's where I met Dorothy, my wife, you know, on Dick Tracy, and she was, you know, amazing. And it's what brought me to Star Trek. You know, Dick Tracy brought me to Star Trek.
Who else can say that? Dick Tracy brought me my wife and led me to Star Trek.
Right? No one, not a single soul but Doug.
I know. Doug, when was it exactly that you came out here to California?
I got out here in '87, I guess, to start preparation somewhere.
Wow.
Just like 10 years after the Federation Trading Post, you know, and 10 years and 20 years after the original series. You know? Life is a trajectory.
What work in both makeup design for Next Generation and your visual effects for either Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, or Picard was the most challenging and or the most rewarding personally for you once you saw the finished product?
With makeup, I always think of Data's daughter, Lal, was unique. You know, I loved coming and working with Mike Westmore. And he's still one of my dearest friends, and just the sweetest guy ever. And if you know anything about the Westmores, they kind of, outside of Lon Chaney, kind of invented Hollywood makeup. And there was a time where there was a Westmore who was the head of makeup at every major studio in Hollywood, you know. Bud Westmore was at Universal, and Chris Westmore was at Warner Brothers, and Frank Westmore was at Paramount, and so to even work with a Westmore was like mind-blowing to me. But Mike turned out to be so, you know, salt of the earth kind of guy who was funny, you know. And when I finished with Dick Tracy, I went over to Paramount and I begged Mike to let me come work on the show. And he was like, "But why? You're doing features?" And I'm like, "Well, Mike, I'm telling you, it's always been about Star Trek, you know." So it's like, that's the most important thing to me. I had mentioned this to him about 6 months ago. We all went out to dinner, and Mike said hiring me was a no-brainer, which was one of the nicest things I'd ever heard. But yeah, I mean, well, Lal was great, and getting to do anything on Star Trek was just, you know, really exciting for me. The thing I remember was that, and it got me in trouble with some of the other makeup artists, was that I was so attentive. And like, for instance, if one of my characters, or any character, if I was nearby, I would ask Marvin Rush if I could look at them through the camera, which was unheard of, apparently. But it never was for me and John. We always realized we needed to look through the camera and see what the DP was seeing, you know. But when I came to Star Trek, that was like, I think Marvin Rush was taken back. You know, if you're the DP on a TV show, you're kind of the king, because you're also partly the director. You know, directors come through these shows like traffic cops, but the one guy who's always there is the DP. You know, so when I wanted to look through the camera, I think there was some hesitation, and I think that some of the other makeup artists felt like I was making them look like they weren't doing the job. I actually had one of the makeup artists talk to me, and making us look bad. And I told Mike Westmore I had to. I go, I think, you know, they're not happy with me. And he says, "Look, you're working for me. You know, you want to make me look good. That's what it's about, not them." You know, I was on stage one day during my makeup days, and I was at the craft service table, which was just to the left side of the bridge. And a second AD comes up to me and says, "Are you Doug Drexler?" This is very early, right after Dick Tracy came out. And I'm like, "Yeah." He says, "Gene Roddenberry would like to speak to you." And I'm like, "Am I fired?" It's like, what does Gene Roddenberry want to talk to me for? And she took me onto the bridge, and Gene was sitting in the back of the D bridge in a tall director's chair. And he just wanted to tell me what a great job we did on Dick Tracy. That is so unique to have a producer tell you that Terry Metalis, he's one, to tell you that you did a great job. It's so unusual. But to hear that from Gene, it was like life had come full circle. Although I didn't realize that life really wouldn't come full circle till season 3 of Picard.
Doug Drexler, we could go on for so much longer than this half hour. Wait, it does sound like I'm wrapping up.
That's because you are, BK, but you also aren't. The interview is only half over. Doug has so much more to trek along with us in our journey to a Roddenberry Star Trek utopia. Reminding you Trekkies, we may look like we're in a Starfleet ambassador's quarters on a Federation ship,
But actually, we're in a studio, a green screen studio.
We're here on Earth taping this show in a studio in Los Angeles, California, or more precisely in South Pasadena. Join BK and I as we officially wrap up with our talk with Doug Drexler.
Oh, next week, right? Yes.
Next week.
Actually, I'm going to have to change my costume here because in our little Klingon battle, you ripped it.
You ripped
it, Lily.
I'm going to have to fix my makeup after showing you who's boss.
Okay.
Bye for now.
Hello, happy, my old friend. I'm glad you've manifested yourself into a human I can depend on to bring me happy.